Yeah, I'll just probably give another couple seconds for the others to come in. I'm
Yep.
starting to see people popping through. Welcome all. Thank you for joining us. Just going to give a couple more seconds. Okay, we might as well do the introduction so we can get to the um good to see you too, Mark. So we can get to the interesting content faster. So let's quickly do the introductions so we can get that out the way. So if you haven't met me, I'm Felix. I'm from my news. Probably time for me to update the slides too. But we particularly work with those doing the psychosocial implementation, particularly the consultation aspect of that, and we provide a tool to help do that analysis at a high quality, more efficiently and effectively. And joining us, we also have Niru. She's been in the space for quite a few years now, and we've been quite lucky. I think this whole year, we've been quite consistent every 2 weeks,
Yeah,
and a
yeah,
great way of sharing content and sharing learnings. And it's been a great way, I think, to really see how things progress as well,
yeah.
every couple of weeks. So really great to have you join us as well throughout the whole webinar. If you have any questions, feel free to send them through. I may keep them at the end, or I might pop them through. But I'll pass it now to Neri for you to get started and introduce the webinar.
Hey, thank you, Felix. So what we've been basically doing this whole year, if you haven't attended all our webinars, is that we've been testing a lot of the theories that that have been spoken about. We've been testing the code of practice. We've been testing practicality of things, of how they work. Mainly from an organizational point of view, we've been trying to work out what kind of frameworks organizations do use, where we're going to get the information from, and who do we have to work with in order to do a proper psychosocial risk assessment. Today is a little bit of a play with all the things we've spoken about so far, and trying to implement that into some sort of a framework, in some sort of a solution, for want of a better word. So we are on the third section of the three sections that we are doing this year. First, we did the individual psychosocial hazards that impact individual, and individuals have some amount of impact in. And I'd like to be very clear that majority of the psychosocial risks and hazards are not influenceable by the workers as much as by the leadership or the organization. And then we did the team dynamics of how they play out in teams, and what controls we can have in place there. So this is the third section where we are actually talking about organizational level hazards and what organizations as a whole can do, particularly from a leadership point of view. So the first two we did a bit of a play on what the hazards were that played out in the organizations. And then the second webinar was about what frameworks would work in such scenarios. So that's the one previous to this. And then today is basically doing a little bit of a practice exercise to see how we can actually implement one of those solutions. So could we get the next slide, Felix, please? Sorry, that was a long introduction because we've done so much, haven't we? Like, I have to preface what we are about to do. So the old, again, it's a little bit of a repetition, but I like to sort of have a little bit of understanding of where we are coming from. So the old one was, if you have people stressed out, if you have people claiming fatigue, if you have people who are not coping with their work, the first one was give them support, give them training, look at the welfare, well-being kind of things that we can do in an organization. That's the old bit. The new way of looking at things from the psychosocial code of practice point of view is, first we look at what are the work factors that are creating circumstances, cultures like that, which are basically taking you towards how to redesign work and what those controls are. Because it's a very qualitative space, quantifying that can become quite challenging. Identifying that can also become very challenging even before we can quantify it. So industry maturity wise, I think we are at a stage where we are still identifying the controls. We are not even quantifying them. So Like I'm very excited to see what the work environment will look like in 10 years' time when all this work would have been done. So we are at a stage when we are just identifying. So let's go with that. I have my usual slide up, which basically gives you a bit of an idea of how big this thing is. So can we go to the next slide, Felix, please? And as you can see, this is safe work figures, 28.4% of increase in primary psychological workers' compensation claims. Now, this has led to a lot of controversy in the industry that, oh, we need to rethink of how we process claims, which has been the leading conversation coming down from New South Wales. And I think they were going to change from full body injury to partial body injury and doing all kinds of insurancy things. But at the end of the day, that is a post-event control, and we don't want to get there. So a lot of our work is how do we not get here? And so we are not. So if we don't injure the people, we will not be having this conversation at all. Anyway, so let's talk about the judgment loop. So the judgment loop is basically how do you? It's not a negative way of saying oh, we are being judgy. We are. But we need to understand how to make a judgment of a particular psychosocial risk, right? So we have the evidence. What are the signals that are repeating? And this is the key word here, repeating. We are looking at patterns. So if somebody yells at someone in the office because they're having a really bad day and they're struggling with difficult circumstances on that particular day, we all do it. We all have a breakdown and we all do not do the best things that we would want to do at all times. One-off instance is not a pattern. And I want to be very, very clear about it because psychosocial risk is management of patterns. It's not looking at one-off or outliers as such. So we are looking at what signals are repeating. If people are consistently overworked, under-resourced, yelled at consistently, then that's when we come into a situation when we start looking at what sort of exposure is this, who is exposed, how often is this happening, what is causing the escalation every time, because there are patterns here. And then we look at the work factors. For example, if people are losing their cools repeatedly and they're falling sick, you have a team, everyone's calling in sick every other day, what's going on? Is it that people are actually sick, or is it that people are getting sick because they are overworked or they are stressed or their workload is not managed properly? So that's where you want to start looking at where the risks are. And before even people start falling ill, you need to start looking at whether people are coping, not coping, what the early indicators to that are. And then you start looking at the controls. So the control is not asking people to manage their time better. That is not a control. What we are looking at is how the work is designed, how the leadership and the organization prioritizes work of what needs to be delivered first, what needs to be delivered second, and how the workflow itself happens. So a lot of the times what happens is, somebody does a piece of work and then they go away to do something else, and somebody else picks up that piece of work and they do majority of the work that has already been done. And then they get to the work that needs to be done. So the delegation and the management of work and how the work is designed is also very important, because there's a lot of repeating of the same kind of work. There's a lot of doubling back, checking and rechecking, which is not ideal for a smooth workflow of the way the work to happen. And then, of course, assurance from a leadership and organizational point of view to make sure that the things are happening the way they're expected to happen. Now, just from workplace health and safety point of view and from psychosocial risk point of view, I wanted to just caption this conversation and say, a lot of this knowledge and information actually does not come from traditional workplace health and safety, body of knowledge. All of this is actually coming from a very old time when I was in university and I was doing an MBA, and we used to do a subject called organizational behavior. Remember, Felix? Organizational behavior. It's now called, organizational, design or organizational psychology. There are lots of names. There are degrees that you can do in it now. In the old days, it was only a course. But there are really good researchers out there, not the least of them Maslow, who I think is quite dated now. But there are many other researchers and thinkers who have come up with very good strategies of how these things can be designed and managed. So we are at a point where in safety we have to step outside our little cocoon and look at other disciplines for solutions to how to manage psychosocial risk. So the next one, Felix, is around what our scenario is from today. So I have made a fictional organization called the Southern Star Services. So this is like a medium-sized organization, 650 people. It's grown quickly, introduced new operational model, is running several technological, softwares, and there's a restructure program in because they've had a little bit of a growth. Classic scenario you see in every second or third organization in Australia at the moment. So ELT is concerned about the increasing psychological injury claims and absences. So there's been a couple of claims and they're concerned about it. Manager says that they're drowning in competing priorities. So fatigue is coming up as one of the indicators. Workers report unclear decisions and heavy meeting load. Like, I think that's one of the things, like you open your calendar and you've got like 7 meetings. So if you attend all 7 meetings, what work are you going to do? HR has proposed resilience training and well-being webinars. The board asks what organizational risks are we actually controlling? So the board now is aware that there is a psychosocial risk management code of practice. So they want to know what are we doing about it. So classic scenario, I think this would describe my past 4 contracts that I've done. And it's been exactly the same with different degrees of each one of them, but the questions are quite standard. So what are we going to do? We're going to create evidence, and we are going to look at what the organization is doing. So creating the evidence is not about talking about creating the paperwork. It is basically looking within the organization, and the standard visualization technique I use is that it's very Indian, that you've got a spice box and you've got all the spices on the table and you're going to kind of put them in their right places so you can actually understand whether there is a pattern of management there or not. There are some organizations who have their heart in the right place and they are doing a lot of things which actually amount to managing psychosocial risk. But either they just don't know it or they don't know how to quantify it and prove that they're doing the right thing. So part of the job is also providing that evidence to the organization. And at the same time, once you've understood what the organization is doing, then you can show them where the gaps are. Because unless you understand what's happening in the organization, you're not really going to be able to give them the visibility of what needs to be done. So what are we looking at? We're looking at claims and absences. So yeah, that's very important. What sort of holidays people are taking. Mind you, this is all information that you need to source from human resource. Now, there is always a wall between workplace health and safety and human resource data. A lot of organizations are coming across and allowing workplace health and safety advisors to access HR information. It's a question of signing a confidentiality agreement, which all human resource people sign. That's all. But it can get problematic in big organizations to have that chat with your managers, with your ELT, that if you want us to do this, we need this information and this is where it sits. Okay, so claims and absence data. There are usually surveys, or conduct a survey for yourself. It's pretty straightforward just to get a bit of information. If you're working for a government agency, it will be working for Queensland survey. That's got about 75% of the psychosocial risk information. I particularly, if anybody's interested, I have developed a sort of interface which gives you easy understanding of what working for Queensland survey looks like and where the gaps are. So you only fill in the gaps. You don't do the whole survey altogether. And I think it happens once a year around this time only, September, October. Operations. What vacancies there are in the organization. Are there more than 90 days? Are there teams that are having vacancies like on an ongoing basis? And workers' priorities as well. So you're looking at changes in their portfolios, how long they've been in roles and things like that. And then, of course, the governance of all of it, looking at risk registers, what well-being activities have been happening, et cetera, et cetera. So you look at the signals, which is basically not equal to diagnosis, but signal pattern exposure, that's your risk judgment. Do I need to repeat myself? So you're looking at the signals. This is probably the best slide in the entire talk today, okay? And the most important slide. So you're looking at what the signal is in the business, whether you've got attrition, whether you've got absences, whether you've got people turning up to work sick, whether you've got people fatigued, etc. So you're looking at all those signals. And then you're looking at the pattern of those signals. So you've got your 10 signals here, then you're looking at the patterns. And then you're looking at who's exposed to what extent. That is really important. The exposure is important because a lot of the times in many businesses, they'll have a lot of work coming in for 2 months in a year. And then 10 months it's quiet. So you really can't consider that as a high risk. Yes, at that point of time, they need the support and everything. But because the other 10 months are normal, it's not that much of a risk. Whereas if it keeps on going from month to month, and there's no let up, then you really do have a high risk situation. Okay, next one. So the exercise is to identify the organizational risk factors. And I always recommend that out of the 17 risks, zero down on the first 5 or first 7 or 8, which are really big on your organization. Which are the ones that are really big, that stick out, which you want to be looking at first. There are organizations, for example, who do IT work, and 90% of their staff is scattered across the state, never come into the office. They work remote and isolated. You want to know whether they are doing their work on their dining table, whether they are working in a secure environment where they can lock the door, who else is in the house all of those things matter, and they matter on the people's well-being as well. So identify the top risks first. And then the next step is do a defensible synthesis, Try and work out, if you have high job demands, why is it happening? What is the evidence that demonstrates that there's a high job demand? Is it because people are working long hours? Is it because they're doing, weekend work? Or is it because they are not able to switch off even if they're at home? What is the high job demand coming from? Is it because in many situations, people are trying to do jobs which they haven't been trained for or haven't been given enough of job control for, or they don't have clarity about? So you know how all of these things kind of interplay into each other. So the next one could be, you want to know whether people have clarity about their jobs. Have there been a lot of role changes in the organization? Have there been a restructure? Next one is looking at poor change management, which is very, very common. I have not seen a lot of organizations do change well. And then poor support and low control. And this one I like to flag in a way that a lot of the times the workers will come to you, we've got no support, we've got no understanding of how to do our jobs, and then they look on to their managers, but the organization then fail to look at the managers and understand whether the managers have the support they need. So the managers really, at the end of the day, can offer what they receive, right? So it becomes a whole organizational kind of thing. Next one.
I just wanted to jump in with the results that everyone else shared while you were going through your version of the answer. So the top answers we got so far were high job demands.
Okay.
High job demands, then it's poor organizational change. And then, so those as the top 2, and then people also connected with the low job clarity, poor support, low job control. And on the lower end is the organizational justice and relationships.
That is interesting because did you know one of the biggest things in poor change management is consultation? And what I actually find is that it's probably one of the things that organizations do it worst. So, yep, change is really hard. People don't like change, but it can be done well if people are consulted. Wow, high job demands. That's pretty cool, Felix. I think it'll be a good idea to share it with everyone after the webinar so that they have a little bit of an idea of where this is looking at poor organization change management. Yep. So high job demands is very vague, and you want to break it down a little bit. Like what entails when you say high job demands? What is it demanding of you? Is it demanding just your headspace? Is it demanding your time? Is it demanding your, is it kind of coming into your personal life? Like, what is the definition of high job demands? People tend to confuse high job demands with fatigue and stress as well. So both of these can be outcomes of high job demands, but you want to kind of work through what in your particular scenario constitutes high job demands, because on its own, you can't really control it. Like there is no single one control for high job demand. There is a control for large quantity of work. There is a control for structuring of work. There is control for a lot of other things. But what it really is a number of things. For example, if you have a really good leader, he can come in and say, make meetings work for you. Do not just put up your hand to make meetings. We are not expected to attend more than 3 meetings a day. End of story. So if people want to work with that, they will make those meetings count. But there are a lot of decisions like this which can ease that high job demand stress. The other one could easily be that, if you've worked for a certain amount of hours, you will take the break and there will be somebody in the team to take up your set of work. There's some sort of a job sharing happening. But that only works if the team's working well. If not, then you can run into problems there. So realistically, I would say define what high job demand is before you get into calling it a hazard and then starting to put in controls. I have had a bit of a breakdown. I have done a bit of a breakdown. We don't have time today, but I'm happy to share it with you a little bit later. Or I can send, I've got a fact sheet, Felix. I might send it to you later on. Okay, next one is map controls to the risk. So this is basically what I was talking about. Sorry, I was a little ahead. So work design is change the workload, look at your deadlines, look at your staffing, and then the decision rights. That's where a lot of consultation comes in. Like, is the leader only one who's making the decisions, but he's not really doing the job? So you really have to push your decision making to where the work is happening and provide the workers an opportunity to make decisions around what work they can deliver. But it's also a little bit of a trust building exercise, and we can talk about trust separately because it's neither a hazard nor a control. It is something that is an outcome of a good culture. But if there is trust between the leaders and the workers, then you find that all of these things become a lot easier to do. And then the governance is who's the risk owner, escalation rules, board and ELT reporting. And try to understand that governance is not one way only. It's not about leaders being informed of what's happening in the business. It's also about leaders informing the business and having that conversation with them. So it's 2 ways. And then the leadership routines, priority setting, consultation, manager cadence. This is really, really important. This is about 60% of the work. If you don't clarify what the leadership is doing, how the leadership is doing, you're not going to build trust. You're not going to have good consultation. The change management is going to go out the door. And then, of course, capability, manager skills, worker awareness, role clarity, and training. Then you have the recovery and support. That's the last bit. And then we can go all have lunch. Okay, next one is control mapping. So we've kind of done a bit of a synthesis on what our hazards are. We've looked at what the controls we need to use from the controls, and now we need to map them according to our risks. So we know that these are our risks, and we know these are the controls. Now we need to map them. So where you have high job demands, the primary control will be capacity review, for example, stop-start prioritized rules, meeting load controls, deadline resets after vacancy review. So these are just very basic things that human resource does. But the problem here is that human resource will rarely actually do an analysis. So where psychosocial risk is coming on top and saying, okay, you had all these things happen, let's analyze it further and evaluate it, how it is impacting the business, and what can we do better in this space so that it doesn't happen. And then it's the assurance piece, which is fairly important, that how do you get the understanding that you are actually progressing in the right direction? So you have a workload dashboard, overdue vacancies, and consultation pulse. It's a fancy word of saying that basically you're trying to work out, how much of work is done beyond people's reasonable capacities. Have there been vacancies that have gone more than 90 days? What sort of consultation is happening? Has it gone up? Has it gone down? Similarly, for low role clarity, you have decision rights map, how the decision making happens, role accountability, escalation pathways, and conflicting priorities. Are we kind of getting a little bit of an idea? I would really appreciate if somebody could, say yes, no, kind of going in the right direction with Southern Star services. And then they have the change management conversation happening. Have you got a psychosocial risk assessment? I just had a conversation this morning with one of the business leaders, and this was around psychosocial risk assessment. And they were like, what do we do with it? Like, okay, we've got our risk register, we've done our psychosocial risk assessment, and now what? Good question, right? So the conversation was like, where are you going to use your psychosocial risk assessment? Why are you going to use it? A lot of the times, mind you not, I have seen human resource people pull out the psychosocial risk assessment template and sit down with one individual to try and work out where they are at with their stress levels, with their fatigue levels. Nothing wrong in doing that, but I would say it is more recommendable to do that sort of psychosocial risk assessment from a team level, because you want to understand what's happening in the team rather than with an individual. Because that becomes too specific, you're too close to the matter, you will not get the kind of information that you need. So it's always recommended to do it on a team level or an organizational level. Usually from a level where you have the officers in the organization. So finally, when you do have a psychosocial risk assessment, use it every time. Every time you have incident, have a look at it, review it from time to time basis. Every time you have somebody flagging overwork, somebody flagging any of these early indicators. If you notice there are too much absenteeism, people moving in and out of roles, you've got to look at your risk assessment and figure out what's going on. And then, of course, poor support and low control. That goes without saying. You look at the manager's workload, protected one-on-one to one-to-one conversations, workers' input into priority trade-offs. So that's kind of a little bit of negotiation that happens with the managers and workers. It can be collectively, which we call collective bargaining in the public sector. And some unions do it better than others. But can you sort of see it again that although we are talking psychosocial, we are essentially talking industrial relations, organizational psychology, and human resource aspects in safety now. That's why we need to learn more about all of these things. All right, where are we now? Next one. So we've done that. So this is sort of a question that I would recommend just to ask yourself while you're doing all this, that you ask yourself the question, what psychosocial hazards are material to the organization? Again, going back to your main hazards from a regulator point of view. How do you know who's exposed and where the risk is concentrated? So that is something you've got to work out from the indicators through the risk assessments. There are some teams, for example, which are constantly under the pump. They keep on getting new projects every other week. are they more exposed to the other teams who are just working in the back end? Like I was having a conversation with customer facing work and operational work, like who is doing what. Anyway, so ask yourself all these questions and then take it to the next level of what the business needs from a regulator point of view. Now, the next one is actually, oh yeah, that was the last slide of our worked example. So I've got a couple of take-home questions for everyone. So what I actually was thinking would be really good thought exercise would be just think of a well-being problem that you've been having in your company and just convert it from a risk point of view and take it back to what it would look like if it was like a risk management process. That is one. And I've given you steps here how to work through that problem. And we'll probably have a little bit of a recap in the not next one, next is Peter, but the one after. And I have a case study as well in the end. Oh my God, just about made it, Felix. I was 1 minute over.
A bit longer than normal, but I think that's because I interrupted you
I thought
in the
I
middle.
didn't explain it. So sorry for going over.